Welcome to A Dram of Outlander. This is Desiree, your podcaster and the writer for ADramOfOutlander.com. For all things Outlander, from the Diana Gabaldon book series to the Stars TV series and everything in between. This is podcast episode 118, Drums of Autumn, chapters 6 and 7, week 4. Well, hello! It is another week, and we're starting to get into the story of Drums of Autumn. The summary of this episode is: men like to take their pants off around Claire. They like to ogle her bosom. Jamie's always playing the political, whether he likes it or not. And an interesting offer is had. Chapter 6. I Encounter a Hernia, June 1767. So we left off in 1969. 200 years and 2 after this, with Roger and Brianna with the moon landing. So the timing is following the normal patterning of things. And as this chapter opens for Jamie and Claire, if you remember, they had gotten rid of Stephen Bonnet and had enjoyed themselves on that hot, humid night at the river. This chapter opens, and Jamie hates boats. But for expediency's sake, it's the preferred mode of travel to Cross Creek, where Jamie's family, the Camerons, reside. Cross Creek is a real place in North Carolina. Within the show notes, instead of having interesting links at the bottom, I've switched it to linking inside the notes themselves. So any place that's underlined and blue is a clickable link to take you where you want to be. This was where a very high concentration of Scots settled in North Carolina. Hector Cameron is his uncle by marriage to his Aunt Jocasta. Jocasta is his mother's sister. Claire tries to assure him that rivers don't have waves like the ocean. She also still carries those acupuncture needles she got from each and Joe. They had been traveling their way from Charleston north to Wilmington. During their travels, they came across an abandoned homestead that had a peach orchard. So they ate their body weight in peaches each and gathered as much as they could so they could sell it, and they made a little bit of profit along the way. However, now they all smell like peaches and are sticky. We had sold it as we went, and consequently had arrived in Wilmington with sticky hands, a bag of coins, mostly pennies, and a pervasive scent of fermentation that clung to hair, clothes, and skin, as though we'd all been dipped in peach brandy. "You take this," Jamie advised me, handing me the small leather sack containing our fortune. "Buy what you can for provisions. Dinna buy any peaches, aye? And perhaps a few bits and pieces, as we dinna look quite such beggars when we come to my kinsman. A needle and thread, maybe?" He raised a brow and nodded at the large rent in Fergus's coat, incurred while falling out of a peach tree. So they really have only what's on their bodies. They arrived shipwrecked with very minimal supplies and provisions, if any. They were set on their way, and now they're finding themselves very close to Cross Creek. So they have to look a little bit nicer. His family would not take kindly to them showing up looking like ragamuffins, Jamie thinks. So now Claire is tasked with getting provisions, while Jamie and Duncan must sell the wagon and horses to secure boat services. It would take far too long for them to get all the way to Cross Creek from there. Weeks instead of days by riverboat. Young Ian decides to send Rollo along as an added security measure. Smart nephew. Fergus is eyeing the goods Claire has picked up. Except for the item of lace and ribbons, he thinks it's a good idea. Claire is certain it's necessary so they can look presentable when they arrive at the Camerons. Fergus gets on board with the idea and states Claire needs a ribbon color too. Women are never too old to wear pink. I've heard Les Madames say so many times. Yes, and Claire knows she's heard about Les Madames' opinions before. Remember Fergus was born and raised in a brothel? And he's also spent a little more time there as an adult as well. And Claire is hoping that Fergus would stop going to brothels now that he was married to Marcelli. I went back to the old ways, listen to me. But she supposes that the madams would absolutely know that pink was okay regardless of age. Because Claire's 50-ish, right? She's working on 51. It's not just a color for young girls. And what's really interesting is that blue was actually considered a woman's color and pink a men's until the 1920s. Do any of you have an idea of this? As to French custom, let me know if you do. Jamie and Rollo return. Rollo, like Jamie, can't go unnoticed anywhere he goes. My God, that'll be the biggest dog I believe I've ever seen. I turn to see a gentleman detach himself from the front of a tavern and lift his hat politely to me. Your servant, mum. He ain't partial to human flesh, I do sincerely hope. And Claire looks up to see this very tall man. He's even taller than Jamie, and his name is John Quincy Myers. He happens to be seeking a healer and wondering if Claire might be one. A green-fingered lady might just be tending her roses, but a lady whose hands smell of sassafras root and Jesuit bark is like to know more than how to make flowers bloom. Don't you reckon that's so? And young Ian says, Oh, aye, Auntie Claire's a famous healer, a wise woman. That's so, boy. Well, now. Smite me if this ain't Lucifer's own luck, and me thinking I'd have to wait till I come to the mountain and find me a shaman to take care of it. Okay, so John Quincy Myers has a bit of an issue, and he's not ill precisely, as it turns out. Damnedest thing, though, all of a sudden this great big swelling come up just behind of my balls. Purely inconvenient, as you may imagine, though it don't hurt me none to speak of save on horseback. Might be you could take a peep and tell me what I'd best do for it, And Fergus is taking this as all sorts of humor. And Jamie comes back at this point. Thank goodness. And he comes into this conversation, and they're sort of sizing each other up. James Fraser, your servant, sir. I was told to offer the name of Mr. Hector Cameron by the way of introduction. Mr. Myers looked at Jamie's red hair with interest. Scotch, are you? Be you one of them Highlander fellows? I am a Scotsman, aye, and a Highlander. Be you kin to old Hector Cameron? He's my uncle by marriage, sir. Though I've not met him myself, I was told that he was well known to you and that you might consent to guide my party to his plantation. So they're looking each other up and down like dogs sniffing each other's butts. Quincy's trying to figure out if Jamie's legit or not. And John Quincy Myers is not only assessing Jamie, but Fergus, young Ian, and Rollo as well. He can help them get to River Run, but turns out Hector died the winter before. Old Hector caught the morbid sore throat up and died last winter. Don't figure they get much mail wherever he is now. Oh, that's so cute. This is one of my very favorite characters in this book, and he and his problem create one of my most favorite scenes in all the books. I cannot wait till we get there. He turns his attention back to his testicles. Claire is sure she knows what it is without seeing it. It's an inguinal hernia. That's where some of the intestine breaks through and either is bulging into the abdominal cavity, the groin, or slips down into the testicles. His has gone all the way down. I did spend some time surfing pictures of this, which was quite interesting. I did include a link in the show notes if you want to read about them. I did not post any gruesome pictures. Claire explains that while she could repair it, he would need to be unconscious for her to do so because she has to cut and then suture him back together. And there's really no way for her to do it. He takes in her words, then says he knows the right person to sail them upriver. Jamie's response to this whole episode is patently Jamie. What is it about you, Sassenach, I wonder? What is it about me? He gives her a narrow eye. What is it that makes every man you meet want to take off his breeks within 5 minutes of meeting you? This made Fergus choke slightly, and Ian turned pink. And Claire tried to look as demure as possible. Well, if you don't know, my dear, no one does. I seem to have found us a boat. And what have you been up to this morning? I like the fact that this is really defining Claire's purpose in the new world. She's already got a customer, and they just arrived in North Carolina. So this is really giving us some foundation to what to expect from Claire. And I know they keep saying, oh, she's only a healer here, but she does more doctoring than anybody ever does. Proper doctoring, right? But this is really setting her up. She's going to be successful doing her doctoring, midwifing, all the different things that she will do under the guise of being a healer. In another twist of goodness, Jamie has found a potential gem buyer. They're heading to a party where Governor William Tryon and other influential people will be, particularly a German baron. It turns out the governor's wife's secretary is a distant cousin to Jamie, of course. And I love how Claire's response to, and McGregor knows so-and-so, who knows so-and-so, who knows so-and-so, because it's the Scottish way of feeling people out. Who do you know? Who are you connected to? Are we connected to each other? But now they have to look the part. So Jamie was able to get an advance from cousin Edwin on the gem sale. So Claire goes shopping for an out-of-date but decent gown. And it happens to be a gown made of local silk. So it's far less expensive, even though it looks really nice. And the seamstress was quite unimpressed with Claire's fashion tastes. Because if you remember, Claire hates being fussed over. She won't wear powder. She won't wear a wig. She doesn't care what her hair looks like. She doesn't wear jewelry hardly ever. And the seamstress says, "You're dripping, madam." She was the preeminent dressmaker in Wilmington, and I gathered accustomed to having her fashion dictates obeyed without question. My rejection of a frilled cap in favor of freshly washed hair had been received with bad grace, and predictions of pleurisy and the pin she held in her mouth bristled like porcupine quills at my insistence on replacing the normal heavy corsetry with light boning, scalloped at the top to lift the breasts without pinching them. So Claire decides to tuck up her dripping hair back into the linen towel around her head. And they've been given guest quarters at Mr. Lillington's house, where the party will be. And Claire certainly didn't mind that it was over the stables, because it was far cleaner than the inn that they had left Fergus and young Ian at. So after everything is fitted and Claire finds out the details of this dress, and she doesn't care about fashion. She just wants to make sure she's going to look decent to the other people at this party and not look foolish. Jamie swoops in with a bauble for her bare breast. It was one of the gems that they had retrieved from a bondaway after Claire kills Galus. So it's one of the gemstones that Galus had gotten a hold of in order to travel, right? From the box where young Ian was taken, from Seals Island or the Silky Island. All right, so that ruby is now around Claire's neck. And she notes that Jamie also had procured a bath and his coat had been brushed and he had rented beautiful buttons for the occasion. And Claire's certainly going to be a fine distraction for the evening's dinner plans. There will be movers and shakers at this party. So this is setting up their future. We have no idea what's going to really happen at this party. Jamie wants to talk to the governor and make acquaintance because getting known, being known, making connections is really how you get anywhere. It's who you knew. And things are really seeming to revert back to that now in this age of social media. It seems like you can't even get an entry-level job at a fast food restaurant without knowing somebody who works there. It's very interesting that it seems that society has returned to that format to some degree. And we see, again, that Claire is getting set up for her doctoring. And John Quincy Myers seems like he's pretty decided he wants Claire to fix this. So he's going to find a way. So pay attention to that for the future. Chapter 7. Great Prospects Fraught with Peril. At the dinner, Claire was unnerved by the sturgeon staring at her from the plate. She was not too canny on the presentation of dishes during this time period to make things look alive still on the plate when they were dead. And it was really causing her to lack appetite. It says, complete not only with eyes, but with scales, fins, and tail, the 3-foot fish rode majestically in waves of roe and aspic, decorated with the vast quantity of tiny spiced crabs which had been boiled whole and scattered artistically over the platter. Ugh, it's not my favorite thing to have my food staring at me either. And roe are fish eggs, and aspic is a beef gelatin. Yum. So fish egg jello. Woohoo! That does not sound delicious at all. I don't know. I'll take a burger and fries over that any single day. Claire is also not too happy with the companions near her or the conversation. Mr. Stanhope and a Phillip Wylie are in discussion, but Stanhope decides he's going to talk about somebody's hemorrhoids while they're eating dinner. And Wylie tells him how rude that is, basically saying he's going to cause people to lose their appetites. Then the topic of taxation erupts. And we hear about the repeal of the Stamp Act. And then Claire dives in to make amusing conversation, momentarily diffusing the situation. She inquires what the current tax rate is, and the dandy, Wylie, fills her in. Now remember, women don't really talk about these things in this time period. Heck, people don't think women should be talking about this much now still. So for her to be inquiring and having intelligent, witty responses for this is going to take them aback a little bit, but also interest them greatly. Now, remember, her bosom is showing and she's got a nice rack, right? And there's this beautiful ruby that's hanging between her breasts. So she's sort of commandeering the end of this table. Wylie pursed his lips, considering. A dandy, he wore the latest in modish wigs and a small patch in the shape of a star beside his mouth. Under the powder, though, I thought I detected both a good-looking face and a very shrewd brain. Oh, considering all the incidentals, I should say it can amount to as much as 2 per centum of all income. If one was to include the taxes on slaves, add taxes on lands and crops, and it amounts to a bit more, perhaps. 2%? Stanhope choked. Iniquitous, simply iniquitous. And Claire's thinking about the last bit of IRS form that she had signed. And she wonders where the 2% tax rate outrage was in her former time period. Why were Americans lacking the fiery spirit? But perhaps we should change the subject, I said, seeing that heads were beginning to turn in our direction from the upper end of the table. After all, speaking of taxes at the governor's table is rather like talking of rope in the house of the hanged, isn't it? Oh, Claire, you're fast. Claire's cleverly trying to find out about local business, particularly that of the printing business, because she's thinking maybe Jamie can have a respectable job as a printer and get Bonnie, his press, out of storage in Edinburgh. But as she's thinking, the Committee of Safety is brought up, as well as discussion of Jamie's political leanings, in the sense of who's he affiliated with, because printers will often have their own leanings and seditiously, like Jamie did, print materials outside of their normal scope of work. So Wylie's inquiring here. So this is dangerous ground. Claire's going to have to get away from this. Now, the Committee of Safety, there's also a link in the show notes, were put into place in areas that were more rural and away from the main city centers to help keep the peace. And they worked for the governor. Now, what's really interesting about the colonies, as though, yes, they were under British rule, it was pretty chaotic on the ground. And there were soldiers there, but could the king really have great direct activity? He wasn't there. He was still over in England. So it was still the crowns, but loose. And every colony had their own way of doing things, their own basic rules, even though they had to follow some of the British rules and laws. It was not quite as tidy as we would think it was. So they had a little bit more purview in the colonies, handling things from the top down. So at this point, alarms were going off in Claire's head. Jamie was seated between the host and the governor. Jamie's family connections became the topic of conversation next. Dinner parties were the social networking of the time. Facebook, but in person, or Twitter, but in person. The ruby around Claire's neck was getting attention from the Baron. And Claire thinks of Galis and her good taste in fine gemstones. Again, remember this came from the cash Galis had with her to travel in the cave at Abondaway. So Claire did her job by accomplishing the task of being a distraction and giving Jamie the ability to really hoard the attention of the governor. After the dinner, she escaped to the room they'd been given. Defrocked and naked. Defrocked, it sounds like she's a priest. She had taken her clothes off and was now naked. She sat in the dark of the open window enjoying the breeze. If she would have had candle lit, then bugs would come in because they didn't have screens like we have now. The ruby still hung about her neck. She notices it's as warm as her temperature. She could hear the conversation as the guests waited below for their carriages. She caught pieces of the Wylies and Stanhope talking. Wylie's sister, who was half of Claire's age probably, or even a little bit less, really didn't like Claire very much. Oh, clever. Certainly it was clever. His sister's higher-pitched tones made it quite clear what she thought of cleverness as a social attribute. Well, cleverness in a woman can be tolerated, my dear, so long as she is pleasant to look upon. By the same token, a woman who has beauty may perhaps dispense with wit, so long as she is sense enough to conceal the lack by keeping her mouth shut. Miss Wylie might not be accused of cleverness, but had certainly adequate sensibility to perceive the barb in this. She gave a rather unladylike snort. She is 1,000 years old at least. Pleasant to look at indeed, though I will say it was a handsome trinket about her neck. Oh, quite. Though in my opinion, it was the setting rather than the jewel that was striking. Setting? There was no setting. The jewel merely rested upon her bosom. Really? Stanhope said blandly. I hadn't noticed. And Wylie burst out laughing, breaking off abruptly as the door opened to release more guests. There was a bit of jealousy there from a young Miss Wylie toward Claire. Claire's now holding the stone. It felt even warmer than her body temperature. It seemed almost alive to her, as if it had its own heartbeat. So here's a clue about travelers and gemstones. So pay attention to these little details. They do matter in the future, and they will come up again and again. All the guests had left, but Jamie hadn't come to their room yet. She decided to put her dress back on and go looking for him. You know, she has to go reconnoiter and figure out what's happening. I would be pretty bored too. She doesn't have Twitter or Facebook to be playing on or Netflix to watch. So she has to go do something if she can't sleep on her own yet. He and the governor were talking. She stayed outside the room, quietly listening. The governor is pitching Jamie an interesting offer for settlement. North Carolina is a land of considerable richness, and yet it has not reached the same level of prosperity as have its neighbors, owing mostly to a lack of laborers to take advantage of its opportunities. We have no great harbor for a seaport, you see. The slaves must be brought overland, a great cost from South Carolina or Virginia, and we cannot hope to compete with Boston and Philadelphia for indentured labor. It has been the policy both of the Crown and of myself, Mr. Fraser, to encourage the settlement of land in the colony of North Carolina by intelligent, industrious, and godly families, to the furtherance of prosperity and security of all. To this end, sir, there is established a system of land grants whereby a large acreage may be given to a gentleman of means, who will undertake to persuade a number of emigrants to come and settle upon a part of it under his sponsorship. This policy has been blessed with success over the last 30 years. A good many Highlanders and families from the Isle of Scotland have been induced to come and take up residence here. Why, when I arrived, I was astonished to find the banks of Cape Fear River quite thick with the McNeils, Buchanans, Grahams, and Campbells. That is quite an offer. And he goes on to say there's much land that still needs to be settled further inland toward the mountains. It's remote, but Highlanders might like it there. Jamie said he has heard of it, and that the persons must be Protestant, over 30, and white. Well, we do know that Jamie is over 30. He's white, but he's not a Protestant. So Tryon says, yes, that's the official word here. And Jamie says, I must point out, however, that I'm not a Protestant, nor are most of my kinsmen. And the governor says, very pointedly, you are neither a Jew nor a Negro. I may speak as one gentleman to another, may I not? In all frankness, Mr. Fraser, there is the law, and then there is what is done. And I'm convinced that you understand that as well as I do. So there's the conversation, and then there's the layers of unspoken conversation that are going on. I would never be a good political. Maybe that's why I never made it on Survivor, because I would have a hard time always reading between the lines. Eventually I get there, but I'm not super fast about it. I need time to process and think it through before I can always see the holes. I wonder if we could be trained to do such things. Probably. And then they go on to discuss who'd be qualified to help settle the land. You know, they have to be able-bodied and capable. And Jamie's response is, not all who passed through the Stuart Rising were so fortunate as myself, Your Excellency. My foster son suffered the loss of his hand. Another of my companions has but one arm. Yet they are men of good character and industry. I cannot in conscience partake of a proposal which did not offer them some part. So the government dismisses this. As long as they can earn their own bread and they won't be a burden on the community, they're welcome. So he's really rolling out the red carpet for Jamie. Which is confounding because Jamie is very new to this location, this region, to the colonies. So what does this governor know about him? And now they talk about that blasted oath that they all had to participate in when they were taken into custody. And Jamie says that he's a pardoned Jacobite, and yes, he has sworn the oath like the others who paid the price for their lives. And at this, he decides it's time to get up and end the conversation. We will get to that oath shortly, when Jamie tells Claire exactly what was in it. So the meeting is concluded. Claire makes her way as quickly as she can back to the room, and as quiet as possible. She's really fascinated with the offer and Jamie's ability to run a settlement. He can. She knows he can. And all the possibilities are running through her head at quick pace to regain what he lost in Scotland. Remember, Lollybrock is his nephew Jamie's property now. He's no longer a laird, and even though he wasn't born to it, when his older brother died, it became his. He was the heir apparent. He's very good at taking care of people. He's a good laird. And to be able to become a landowner, a farmer again, work the land, have people beneath him, is a great opportunity, but also a very scary one. Claire is pondering all it can mean to find men to settle any given land. Her biggest fear is Jamie's gravestone in Scotland. The problem was that in order to recruit suitable men for the purpose, he would have to go to Scotland. And in my mind, the sight of a granite gravestone in a Scottish kirkyard on a hill high above the moors and sea. James Alexander Malcolm Mackenzie Fraser, it read, and below that my own name was carved, beloved husband of Claire. I would bury him in Scotland, but there had been no date on the stone when I saw it. 200 years hence, no notion when the blow would fall. Not yet, I whispered. I've only had him for a little while. Oh, God, please, not yet. And at that, Jamie comes back into the room. And he notes how light on her feet Claire is. She doesn't apologize, and she helps him undress, and notices the odors upon him. Brandy, cigar smoke, and nicotina. If you know how to pronounce that word, please let me know. It's flowering tobacco. He had been walking in the garden, and she surmises he's excited for him to go for a stroll at this hour. He mutters about the amount of clothing in this heat, thinking the natives are smarter for wearing a loincloth and apron. Claire is not so sure about this and how it would play out in reality. It would be a lot cheaper, if less aesthetically pleasing. Imagine Baron Penzler in a loincloth, I mean. This makes Jamie laugh. You, on the other hand. Yes. That's funny. Jamie would look fine that way, but a lot of men probably would not look so fetching. So the Baron had agreed to purchase the stone for £300 sterling. And Jamie thanks Claire for being such a wonderful distraction at dinner, keeping Stanhope, Wylie, and the Baron occupied so he could speak with the governor. And then Jamie's protectiveness rises as he recounts Stanhope's eyes falling into Claire's bosom. And then the idea of discretion comes up. And, well, Claire thinks the Scots are not a discreet bunch. The conversation turns to Jamie's grandfather, old Simon. The meeting with the governor must have brought the memories to the surface. The Jacobites, Culloden, or Stuart are not things Jamie ever speaks of. I'd say that discretion and deceit are not necessarily the same things, and your grandfather had been asking for it for 50 years at least. Simon Fraser, Lord Lovat, had died by beheading on Tower Hill at the age of 78 after a lifetime of unparalleled chicanery, both personal and political. For all of that, I quite regretted the old rogue's passing, is what Jamie said. And then Claire asks him about the oath he swore. And if you've never heard the oath, this is the actual oath that imprisoned Jacobites who were not killed had to swear to in order to stay alive. I, James Alexander Malcolm Mackenzie Fraser, do swear, and as I shall answer to God at the great day of judgment, I have not nor shall have in my possession any gun, sword, pistol, or arm whatsoever, and never use tartan, plaid, or any parts of the Highland garb, and if I do so, may I be cursed in my undertakings, family, and prosperity. May I never see my wife and children, father, mother, or relations. May I be killed in battle as a coward and lie without Christian burial in a strange land far from the graves of my forefathers and kindred. May all this come across me if I break my oath. That's a rough oath. But is it really an oath if it's sworn under duress and it's not of one's own initiative? Is he really to be held to that oath to the crown? I don't know. He says at the time he didn't mind it. They were only words. There are things worth dying or starving for, but not words. And this gives Claire a bit of pause. And she thinks there's some words that you would die for or starve for. And she says, what about I love you? Aye, that'll do. Yeah, those are words that you might die for. Words have gravity. And some are definitely more important than others. Claire is disturbed and unable to sleep. Her mind is restless even after sex and release. She envied his ability to sleep. She looked at him, then tried counting sheep. Unfortunately, they were Scottish sheep. So that did not help her at all. Jamie asks her what the trouble is, and she tries to feign being fine, but he says he can hear her thinking. You're a terrible liar, Sassenach. You're thinking so loudly I can hear you from here. You can't hear people think. I can. You at least. What is it? Has the spiced crab given you flatulence? It has not. I just think that's hilarious. I really do. It's funny. If the spiced crab had given her flatulence, he would certainly know it. It would be quite obvious. So she tells him she's been thinking about the governor's offer. And they have a lengthy discussion. And it boils down to, why has it been made? He wants to understand both sides of the bargain before he agrees to anything. And why ask him? He's a pardoned Jacobite. He lacks wealth. And he's a papist, right? He's a newcomer with wealthy family ties, but no loyalties of his own yet. He also believes Governor Tryon is a soldier and sees Jamie as a soldier. And remember the committee of safety that was brought up during the dinner? You don't think that passed Jamie by. He doesn't really miss much of anything if he's in a room. There have been difficulties in the backcountry with men calling themselves the regulators. I put a link in the show notes for the regulators. They were a very real thing. And their activities really helped to spurn the American Revolution. These, it appeared, were a loose association of men, mostly from the rough backcountry of the colony, who had taken offense at what they perceived as capricious and inequitable, and now and then downright illegal, behavior on the part of the Crown's appointed officials, the sheriffs, justices, tax collectors, and so on. Feeling that their complaints were not sufficiently addressed by the governor and assembly, they had taken matters into their own hands. Sheriff's deputies had been assaulted, justices of the peace marched from their houses by mobs and forced to resign. A committee of regulators had written to the governor imploring him to address the iniquities under which they had suffered, and Tryon, a man of action and diplomacy, had replied soothingly, going so far as to replace one or two of the most corrupt sheriffs and issue an official letter to the court officers regarding seizure of effects. So, that was real, just like Governor Tryon is a real historical figure. But this is putting Jamie into an interesting position. Jamie could be placed in the backwoods as an experienced soldier who might be of service and help to the governor if the regulators cause further trouble. As he put it, he could be purchased for 100 pounds and some acreage. The baron offered 300 pounds sterling for the ruby, where the goldsmith only offered 200 pounds, which is a sizable chunk of money then. Claire claims the governor is sneaky and practically Scottish in nature. And as for Jamie being a Catholic, if things didn't go well, he could rescind the offer and take the lands back from Jamie. Right? So that's something in the governor's pocket, a secret that they share. So this is really setting up Jamie to be a leader, to participate in political affairs, to possibly get land to settle. He's going to have to find people that he can bring on board who are capable of working land and being upright citizens. They're not really citizens, right? This is really showing what Jamie's future is going to be carved by. And like Claire will be doing her doctoring and be well known, this is setting Jamie up for being a man of substance, a man who makes a difference, a man who participates. Like, he can't help it. They joke that young Ian always finds trouble, or rather it finds him. Well, Jamie's not a lot different, either is Claire. They are people who stand out. They are people who can't not do. She must take care of people. She gets in the mire, she makes mistakes, and she jumps the gun, and sometimes puts herself in great peril over it. But she makes a positive difference. And Jamie does the same thing. He's a leader. He's a strategist. And he will protect his as much as he can. And if he can turn a profit in the way of it, he will. And he's always looking down the line because he's a chess player, right? He's thinking about his moves. And he's also thinking about his opponent's moves, or even his proponent's moves. So as dawn approaches, the smell of mud, river water, and faint pine fill the room. And it's time for some sleep. They've been up all night. Claire's mind calms momentarily. She is terrified he'll die if he goes to Scotland. That damned gravestone is a relentless reminder of Jamie's mortality. And that gravestone keeps coming up. It's an important piece as well. And we'll find that in the future. Jamie has much to think over. It's quite the offer, albeit with grand strings attached from the governor. What about his aunt? Surely she'll have something to ask of him. So much for Claire and Jamie trying to play under the radar. Certainly they will be topic of much conversation among the who's who in North Carolina, or at least in Cape Fear. That dinner party is not going to go unnoticed. The governor was there, for goodness sake. I look forward to what comes from these chapters. It'll be interesting to see how Jamie wields the power he's finding himself with, because people are going to want him. They can see what he's capable of, even if he's an unknown new prospect. So what's coming up next? Chapters 8 and 9 next week. And how can you participate? You can send your comments to contact@adramavoutlander.com or leave a message on the listener line at 719-425-9444 by Friday of each week. If you're reading ahead, you can leave comments for any part of the book too. Please join the weekly Twitter chat on Wednesday nights at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern using the hashtag ADOO. Comments or messages may be included in the podcast or a written post. And I did get an email about these chapters. So this email comes from Meredith. And here's what she has to say about chapters 6 and 7. I really like the subplot about Myers, and I love the line where Jamie asks what it is about Claire that makes every man they meet want to drop their brakes. I think he's implying that most men find her attractive as well, but let's leave that for now. Somehow I doubt that the subplot about Myers' hernia will make the cut in the show. With only 13 episodes, they could skip it, though I dearly hope they don't. I also really like that Jamie is offered by Tryon the chance to become a laird again. I do think if it comes across as too easy, but at least they're not taking the bait. Not yet, anyway. I really like that this community will be made up of Scots. When I first realized that the story was transferring over to America, I was worried. As much as I appreciate the saga's desire to explore other cultures, such as the English, the French, the Jamaicans, and the Indians, I think you'll agree that Scotland has always been its heart. By having an entire Scottish community on the mountain, they get to have their cake and eat it too. They don't have to go back to Scotland to explore their culture. I think that was quite creatively smart of Diana Gabaldon. I'll have more for you for the upcoming chapters. Happy New Year. Thank you, Meredith from Everett, Washington. I agree with you. I think it was very clever on Diana's part, and the way that she weaves real life people into her books is amazing. And especially in the books while they're in the colonies or in America, it's fascinating how she intertwines the events and people and drops Jamie and Claire in them. It's like Forrest Gump done way better than Forrest Gump. It's amazing how she does it. She's brilliant, to be sure. Claire is very attractive, and she looks half her age in comparison to the people of that time because she's a time traveler, and that somehow makes us, I'm not a time traveler, makes the travelers be well preserved. And she had the benefit of clean living, with the exception of her drinking, in the 20th century. So, along with good genes, she has additional benefits outside the harshness of living in the 18th century completely. So there's that. How can you support the podcast? Well, please share it, tell people about it, have them listen with you. Send them to Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or Google Play. Send them to the website, adramaofoutlander.com. Podcasts can be listened directly there as through all the streaming services that are available. You can also financially support the podcast. I am a one-woman show. Every dollar counts. So if you feel so led, you can go to patreon.com/adramaofoutlander and even offer as little as $1 a month. Every little bit helps. You can also send a one-time offering. You just need to contact me through email or voicemail to do so. I hope to see you on Wednesday night at the Twitter chat. I know there's lots of things to do on Wednesday nights right now with other TV shows going on. But I have very smart listeners, and the interactions are fantastic. And I hope that some of you are new to the books and are getting interested in this part of Outlander as well. And you're not just sticking to the TV show. I just thank you for listening, and we will have some more Outlander Science Club offerings as we get to see Claire's work, which I'm really excited for. I did miss out on that terribly during the TV show, that we really didn't get to see her in day-to-day action. Not really. We got to see her do the big plague ship, but I like that she's medically involved at all levels, from the smallest things to the biggest things. And in the books, there's so much that she gets to do, and it's just part of her nature. She can't help it, just like Jamie can't help being who he is. I've missed these characters, and I'm glad to be back in the books. And, you know, we have 31 more episodes. This is going to be a good time. So please send me your comments, questions, thoughts. Go to the Facebook page and join the Facebook group, A Dram of Outlander. You have to answer some questions and ask to join. But it's a great group. We're sitting at about 1,000 people right now. And I didn't start it until a little bit ago. Follow on Instagram and Twitter. It's Dram of Outlander with no A in the front. And of course, the website again is adramofoutlander.com. And one more time, the listener line is 719-425-9444, and the email is contact@adramofoutlander.com. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, Slán Java.